Hello and welcome. My name is Chris from ChristopherHole.com and welcome to episode 12 of our podcast, where we're going to be answering the question, what is the best exercise for you? Now, you may be thinking, why are you answering this type of question? But what I find is that a lot of people, when they go to exercise, they jump in at the deep end. So they jump in at the deep end of exercise and they try and do sort of high intense, complex exercises or complex poses in yoga or whatever it might be, and their body can't necessarily cope with it. So that might not be the best exercise for you at the moment. There's no reason why you can't get there, and I would always want people to progress themselves and be able to get into that position. But what I tend to find is that people aren't necessarily ready for that. So we're going to discuss how we get ready for that type of exercise, and we're going to start looking at some of the factors that affect what might be the best exercise for you. But before we get into that, I just want to mention my social channels, which you can see on the screen, which is Twitter at Christopher Hole, Facebook Christopher Hole Training, Instagram Christopher Hole. Alternatively, come to the website, go to christopherhole.com/join. Sign up to the monthly newsletter, which again is all video content. There are some exclusive tutorials on there, so you won't see that on YouTube or on my social media channels. So do come along there. You do get a bit more in the way of in-depth information around anything to do with exercise, nutrition, or mindset. We try and cover as much as we can at Christopher Hole Training, with the goal of you trying to improve your health and fitness. So, back to today's subject or question on what is the best exercise for you. Well, first of all, it is sort of affected by a certain degree of factors. Now, some of them you may have thought of. First one is preference. What exercise would you prefer doing? Are you doing an exercise or a type of exercise that your friend told you to do and you don't really like it, but you do it because your friend are doing it? Well, it might be a preference. It might be the time you have available is why you're doing the exercise that you do. It might be location. It might be availability, which is obviously affected by time available and location. You've then got the goal that you want to achieve, so that might affect it. You might have certain injuries that are, or past injuries that are affecting. So if you've had a lot of injuries, you might be choosing something a little bit more sort of lower impact, like a yoga or Pilates. But again, there's things to think about there, which we'll talk about. You might think your skill level. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily think of skill level as a factor that affects the type of exercise that you should be doing or might want to do. But essentially, your skill level is how good you are at exercise. And how I describe that is exercise primary school, exercise secondary school, exercise college, and exercise university. In the national curriculum, we work up through that primary, secondary, college, university. But with exercise, what we tend to do is if we're something like a CrossFit or bodybuilding or HIIT training or even yoga and Pilates, there are certain aspects of that which are more complex and require a foundation to build on top of. So if you're doing an exercise that's too complicated for you and you struggle to do it, that just means you haven't got the skill level yet. Doesn't mean you can't get there, but you probably haven't got it yet, and you might want to think about doing either a different type of exercise or at least build towards that type of exercise that you want to do. And then the next one is your mechanics, so your biomechanics, how your body moves. So for something like CrossFit, a lot of that is based around weightlifting, so the Olympic lifts, the clean and the jerk, and the snatch. So a classic runner, for example, doesn't necessarily have the best body for Olympic lifting. Doesn't mean they can't do it, but in a general sense, it's a lot more difficult for a runner to do it because they have long limbs. Whereas people with shorter limbs and shorter femur lengths, for example, find it much easier to get down into that deep squat position. Whereas people with long limbs and long femurs will find it a little bit harder, if that makes sense. So all of those things will affect the type of exercise that you do. Now, if you're unaware of all of that, you'll just be doing the exercise thinking, oh, this is great, I'm doing exercise. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to explore three of them in a little bit more depth. So we're going to choose injury history, skill level, and mechanics. Now, the reason I'm sort of exploring these three is because as a trainer, many people come and see me not only as a trainer, but also as a therapist, with the idea of the exercise they want to do. So they come to me and they might say, I want to, do some HIIT training, or I want to do some weightlifting, or I want to focus more on like stretching and posture and this and that and the other. Then when I assess them, so the first thing I'll do is I'll sit with them, I'll do a written consultation, then I'll do an assessment on them. And what I'll find is that their body hasn't got the either the range of movement or the strength or the endurance or the core stability to be able to do the exercise that they want to do. So what I have to do is then sort of start them where they are and then build them towards that. Now, initially, obviously, I have to communicate that, because they're thinking, well, I want to do this type of exercise. Why aren't I doing it? Well, it's because, as I mentioned earlier, on some of those factors that affect it, you aren't quite there yet. So we need to be able to get you there. So it might be injury history, for example. So if they want to do the exercise of clean and jerk, they have to be able to get the bar up over their head. But if they've had a shoulder injury in the past and they haven't got the range of movement in the shoulder, for example, then we can't do it. So we might have to go somewhere else and do a different type of exercise, or we might have to stretch out the shoulder a lot more. And they might be thinking, why am I doing all this stretching? Why have I got to go and have a sports massage? Why are you doing this? It's because I want you to be able to get your arm over your head so you can do the clean and jerk that you want to do. So to some degree, I'm giving them what they need before I can give them what they want, if that makes sense. And then the final one is once I've assessed them, as I've mentioned, I can then put them at the level where they are and then build them towards it. So the reason I'm bringing up injury history, skill level and mechanics is because that's the main three things that I have to work with and give people what they need. And the reason I talk about injury history so much is because it's an indicator of future injury. So what we want to be able to do is minimize our risk of future injury. So if they've got that bad shoulder and they're trying to lift over their head with a bad shoulder, or with a shoulder that doesn't function as it should, then there's a good chance they're going to re-injure that. So I have to get not get rid of that injury, but I have to work that injury out of them, if that makes sense, with stretches, with sports massage, with movement, with practicing getting the bar into that position. Then you've got things like skill level. People will tend to jump in at the deep end and go, yeah, I want to do these complicated exercises, or I want to do these complicated poses in yoga. And this is another thing that I find with a lot of people when they go with like a yoga or Pilates type of thing, is they'll say, oh, I go into this position and my shoulder hurts, or I go into that position and my lower back hurts, or I go into that position or posture and my knee hurts. And all that's basically saying is you aren't ready for that pose or posture yet. So what we have to do is we have to build you towards it. So it might be, like I said before, we might have to work out an old injury. Then what we might have to do is break that posture and that pose down, or break that exercise down into like individual parts and say, well, okay, you need to be able to extend your hip further. So instead of trying to extend at your knee, hip and shoulder all at the same time, I might break that down into just the shoulder, just the hip and just the exercise in and the knee in three different stretches. What that allows them to do is understand the positions individually, and then I can start to knit them together. And what that does is that then builds their skill level. And it's exactly the same with your mechanics. If you can't move into a position that requires 3, 4 or 5 joints to be able to move or hold a position at the same time, I need to break that down into its individual parts and then build it together, because that's what sort of college exercise or university exercise, as they could be described or as I describe them, that's more complex. The primary school stuff is just breaking it down into its individual parts, and then as you move into secondary, you start to put a couple of joints together, or you put a couple of joints in an exercise or joints in a stretch together. And then as you move up into college and university, you then start putting whole body stretches and then whole body exercises together and things like that. So what we're doing is we're letting your body communicate what is the best exercise for you, because that's one of the big things that I'm doing as a trainer and as a therapist, I'm not necessarily listening to what your conscious mind is saying. This is what I want to do. I'm listening to what your body is saying to me without it using words, by using movement, by using things like past injury history, which is helping me understand your movement and things like that. So although it may seem quite an arbitrary question to start with, what's the best exercise for you? There are some further questions that a lot of people don't ask. And again, talking from experience, people walk around with injuries for years, or they walk around with aches and pains for years. And it really doesn't have to be the case, because it's a very simple thing that you can do, is just to regress what you're doing, work it out with some sports massage or some osteopathy or some chiropractic. Then just learn how to remove and re-educate the body how to move, and then start adding some load on it and turning it into what will be described as exercise. But a lot of people don't do that because they think, no, I got to work hard. I got to no pain, no gain. I got to get a sweat on and work hard and have a good workout and things like that. And it's from an exercise longevity perspective, that's not necessarily the way to go. So if we're talking about injury history, skill level and mechanics, it's about understanding those three, because that's what your body's communicating to you through movement and through your aches and pains and through your past injuries. It's communicating that to you every single day and every single movement that you do. It's just down to you either finding a professional that can interpret that, or you learning to interpret that yourself. So hopefully this has made a little bit more sense. Hopefully it's given you a bit more of a perspective and maybe expanded your awareness about maybe what is the best exercise for you. Are you doing the best exercises within CrossFit, within bodybuilding, within HIIT training, within yoga or Pilates? Could you be doing slightly different ones and just regressing it? Make it a little bit more simple before going more complex and things like that. So just have a think, maybe write some stuff down, maybe just find out, what past injuries have I had? What movement limitations do I have? What mechanics don't I have? Do I not have adequate range of movement of the ankle, knee, hip, thoracic spine, shoulder joint or shoulder girdle, or whatever it might be? And try to find out where your, let's just call them weaknesses, where they are, so you can then start to work through them rather than just work around them, which is what everyone's doing anyway. And then eventually they just go back and see the therapist, they get rid of the pain, they go back to exercise, the pain comes up again, they go back to the therapist, and they're always on that sort of that self-fulfilling cycle of not really getting anywhere. And then eventually your body gives up and you go, well, I can't do exercise anymore because it just hurts too much. So it's about being able to do exercise for longer. Think about your injury history, think about your skill level, think about your mechanics, build a foundation of all of them, and then progress into the exercise that you want to do, because your body's letting you know what you need to do. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully, again, I've expanded your awareness on what might be the best exercise for you. So many thanks for listening. My name is Chris from ChristopherHole.com. Please come and listen to me in next week's podcast. Next Monday it will be out. So I will speak to you then. Cheers. Bye-bye.